Hey everyone, it's TTL back with another video for you, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Fractal Vector RS. Now it's loosely based, or the internal part of the case is based on the old Define, so essentially the R6 internals. But then it's got a updated front, RGBs, glass roof panel. So yeah, let's take a look and see what we think. I always start at the top and at the front, and normally with the I/O as well. So we have a power button here, we have a couple of USB 3s, there is a Type-C here, so that's USB 3.1 Gen 2, headphone and microphone separate, and then a reset button there. You can also see that there is a long line across the top up here that's lit up, and then slightly down the front, and then that other section goes all the way down the front panel. Now this part of the case there, where it is RGB, you can actually wire it up straight to the addressable port of your motherboard, and it's completely controlled then if it's plugged in that way with whatever your motherboard is then doing. So it will mimic that, so you can control it with MSI software, Gigabyte software, and the Asus Aura software. But it does come with a little plug in section. That means that if you're not lucky enough to have one of those motherboards, it gives you 3 switches. You've got a speed switch, you have a color switch, and then you have a mode switch as well. And then essentially you can go through lots and lots of different modes, from like the chasing and the RGB kind of effect. Then it goes into separate colors, and you've got all the different static colors that you can then go through. And once you've been through those, if you hit the speed button, you can actually get them to start to chase each other and do other different modes as well. So I think it's quite cool that there is something that you can get there and set the case lighting up as you want without having to have an expensive motherboard. Only problem with this is you would really need to be taking a side panel off to be able to do it. So it's not something that you're going to be able to change or set up externally or very easily without maybe modding this somewhere. And I think it might have been an idea that they could have had it maybe underneath the case or something, so that you could have slid a hand underneath and just been able to flick the switch, or maybe even have incorporated into that top panel. But obviously the negative of it being able to go through the top panel would have been that then the switches are going to be there even if you plug them into your motherboard. So they've gone, you know, there are ways to moan about it both ways. So looking straight at the case, this looks like it should be a tempered glass window, but it's actually just black. It is glass though. Pretty sure it's glass. Yeah, it feels like glass. It's one of those ones where I've said it and it made me doubt myself. But you can't see through it. There are a set of vents this side, and you can see that they're at 45 degree angle upwards, and there are vents mimicked the same way on the other side as well. To pull the front panel off, you literally just give it a bit of a tug, really. And you can see that there are electrical pickups up here for the RGB that runs down the front of the case. And there are also removable dust filters, there we go, that you can get out, and they're quite easily removable as well, and they are protecting the vents inside. Now when we do have the front panel off, you can see that you've got 240mm fans fitted there, maximum RPM speed of 1000, which is gonna need some clarification when we get to the actual fan testing. You can also see down the bottom, just down here, that we have a full length dust filter, and that's because you can put radiators in the bottom of the case as well if you want. But something I did just want to draw attention to, just up here, are these 2 screws, and I'm going to remove these 2 screws for the next section of the video. So the top panel here, if you pull it towards the front of the case, because this is the front of the case where the fans are, where we've taken the front panel off, and we've taken the front panel off to get access to the screws, pull it forward and the glass panel can be removed. And then in the box, what you do get is a mount, which is an offset mount as well, I might add, that you can fit for a radiator. So you can put that in there. Also, there is a mount that you can then add a dust filter, and this all goes in and then pushes into place. I'm trying to do this while watching what I'm doing on the camera, which isn't working very well, but you can click it all into place. So there's that, and then what you can also fit, if you want, is a high airflow top. And this high airflow top basically gives you a kind of a grilled section. I want to say a meshed section. And really the dust filter would be if you wanted a filtered exhaust, which is how they word it, but I'm assuming it would be more use for people if you were going to have it as an intake. Otherwise, I personally wouldn't bother fitting this, unless you're leaving your case for long periods of time without it. So you've got a couple of choices there, and it all comes in the box, which is quite cool as well. But one thing I will say is if we remove the mesh panel and refit the glass top, which I might add, considering that, like I said, I am trying to do this on camera and I've not done it that many times, goes in quite easily. But round the back, you can see there are vents. So if you wanted to fit your radiator mount, which I will say can, well, you can see, look, there's loads of mounts up there. So you can get a 360 in there really easily, but you can go up to a 480. Bigger, fatter radiators are going to be dependent on the hardware that you're going to be running inside. But like I said, because it is offset, it's already moved over, and it makes a change for everything not to be sat perfectly central, which I think they do deserve credit for. But you can still use that radiator with the glass top. So you've got a couple of options. Obviously, if you run the glass top, then that is the only escape for the air, which is very small, which is why you do get the large grilled section as well. But you may just want to go for aesthetics, you may like the look of the way that you can see directly at the fans. Gives you guys a lot of options, it gives you guys a lot of choices that you can make to customise the rig for yourselves. So now with the case completely covered in fingerprints, you see it again the right way up. You see we've got a plain black back panel on here. The back panel, I love the way that the doors do pull off. You literally just give it a tug and then that's it. There are normally 2 screws on the back, but I've obviously pre-removed it. The back panel does have bitumen on it, just like the R6 as well. So there's sound deadening foam on the back panel. Then round the back, you can see it's rather open, and that's quite a good thing. We've got a total of 6 hard drive mounts, but there are 11 locations that you can put them in. This does also mean that you can buy those hard drive mounts individually, and if you wanted to, you can fit 11 mechanical hard drives in there if you want. So it's actually a relatively good server case, which is something I probably should get a little bit more excited about. So with that, you've also got over here a fan hub, but it is only a 3-pin fan hub, and it is a you can connect it to the rest of the rig to be able to control it. Weirdly, the fan connector that it then goes onto is PWM, but the rest of the fan connectors that are actually on this to be controlled are only 3-pin. But it's there if you want it, and it's got a good total there of 9 fans that you can plug in, so that's quite a lot of control that you've got there. A couple of solid state drive mounts over there should you want them, and lots and lots of open area. You've got grommets down the side, grommets at the top, which is something we don't see often enough on cases nowadays. Loads of room for a power supply in the bottom, which does include, I've already shown you the dust filter, which goes full length. If you did want to, because I have said to you about full length dust filter, it does mean that you can put a radiator in the bottom as well. So you can get up to a 280mm radiator in the bottom if you wanted. So a 240 and a 280, not at the same time, but they will fit in the bottom of the case. We've not made a massive effort to be able to cable tie everything, but there are lots of clips and tie down points throughout the case for you to be able to make your build anally tidy if you wanted to. Round to the rear of the case, it does come with a 140mm fan in the box. So many cases nowadays are coming without it, but this one does include it. Also with this one, it's 140mm mount or 120mm mount, but it does come with the 140, and you can adjust it up and down as well. The adjustment's going to help if you do end up wanting to run enormous radiators in the roof. There is the option for a vertical GPU over here, and thankfully you can see when I zoom in that there is a good amount of distance there between the last slot and the side of the case. Now, if you've got a normal dual slot graphics card, there is going to be there's a good 15mm of breathing room there. But if you end up going into something maybe like the Strix, which is a 2.7 slot, it's going to be a lot closer to the outside of the case, and you're going to have to decide whether that's going to be enough room for you to be able to use this mount. If you don't, then you obviously can buy the mounts that go on the normal I/O output here, but then give you the vertical mount, and that's just going to be something that you're going to have to decide depending on the graphics card that you actually own. When we go round to the side of the case again, what we can do is even the tempered glass panel is incredibly easy to remove, but so well made that there's no rattle there and it fits incredibly well. You can see this section here of the case though, and this is where the hard drive cages are. Now, if you're not using that, what you can do is take all the hard drive cages out and fully move that entire panel right the way over. Now, that's going to be great if you're water cooling, but if you're like me and you were just doing that to clean lines up, maybe get some slightly better airflow through, maybe like have a 240 radiator in the front or something like that, but you still have the big hole. There's no cover plate to be able to cover up where you've moved that panel back. And that's something I didn't like on the R6, and it's something I still don't like on this. And I think it was something that for a premium case like this, which, let's face it, £180 is a lot of money for a case now, I do think a panel like that should have been included, and I'm never going to change my mind on that either. And I know I'm getting annoying, keep waffling on about it, but you know, never mind. Other things that we can show you inside the case though is you do get a grommet at the back, which is nice. We like the inclusion of grommets so that you can feed your cables through for the I/O, for your USB, for the power switches and everything like that. It does make things look quite nice. And if I'm honest with you, this is our standard test equipment that we move from case to case. I think with the gunmetal grey kind of going on with the hardware, it actually ends up working really well with the kind of understated aesthetics of the design of the case. Because of the 140mm rear fan, that does mean you're going to be able to get the tallest of air coolers in there should you want it. And while we're talking about coolers as well, because of the offset nature of that radiator grille in the roof, you're going to be able to put even a 360 in the roof, and you're going to be able to get push-pull and all that sort of stuff in it. But just remember, if you want to put a radiator in the front or maybe an AIO from your GPU, then you are going to have to go careful on the location of your hard drive cages in the front if you're using them at all. It's just something to keep in mind when you're imagining this config for your build. So moving on to thermal testing and the conclusion, I do want to clarify how I test this, because it's come up with this that the kind of the thermal config with this isn't that great. And essentially what we do, we set all of the case fans manually, and it's either 600 RPM, 1000 RPM or max. Problem with this case is the max is 1000 RPM as well. So you'll see in the graphs that both the test results are the same. We put them in there so that you can see the difference with the other cases that we've tested. The CPU fan is fixed at 9 volts and the GPU fan is fixed at 60%. So the only differences with the CPU and the GPU fans is the impact that the case cooling has on those parts. Really easy. And the other thing is when we run the CPU, we're using OCCT, 90% memory usage with LinPack. With the GPU specific results, that's using Valley with, and we run that for 30 minutes as well. And we do that in 4K with everything turned up to the hilt. So everything is kept the same other than the actual case itself. Now, 600 RPM, when you're maxing out the CPU or the GPU the way that we are doing, is a very extreme test that you're never likely to simulate at home. But it does give you an idea about the low RPM characteristics of the case fans and how good the case airflow is. So with this, it did okay, we'll say. CPU was better than the GPU, because that's another thing that we do, is we give you the same data, but we just sort it differently. So the CPU graph is sorted in the CPU, and then the GPU graph is exactly the same data and then sorted that way. Now with 1000 RPM, this is the one where we know that the case is running with the fans at 100%. And I do need to say that with them running at 1000 RPM, the case is still incredibly quiet. The other thing that I do need to say is obviously the case has a lot of other options to add more fans in the roof. You can add an extra fan in the front as well. And you also do get the option of being able to change that roof plate over. Now, with the GPU test, if you change the roof plate over so that you've got the vents in it, it drops by a couple of degrees. If you were to add extra airflow in there as well with extra fans, even if it was a CPU cooler, an AIO cooler bolted in the roof, it would get the airflow out a little better and these temps would get better. But what we have to do, or the way I do it, is I test it the way it arrives, and that's how I've tested every single one of the cases as well. So at 1000 RPM, it doesn't look too bad. Not great for the GPU though, I might add, well, not great, it was one of the hottest. And one of the things I will say for the GPU at that level as well, is what we do is we take the temperature and then remove the delta of the room off of it. So the GPU was actually sat at 80 degrees then. And because of the way that the NVIDIA graphics cards work, when it gets to 80 degrees, what it then does is spin the fans up away from that 60%, so that it keeps it at 80 degrees. So with this case, with the fans on max, our 980 was actually getting to the point it was ramping the fans up anyway. So not particularly great. So we were at a thermal threshold with the GPU at that point. And then when you move on to the max, essentially all going into the max does is give the cases with higher case fan RPMs a chance to look better because the data for the Fractal isn't any different. And again, the GPU side of it just doesn't work very well. Now, what I did do was, because it looked like the GPU on this was so warm, we tried another graphics card, another 980, because I have a couple of reference 980s, and we tried that in there just to make sure that, you know, the temperatures were, you know, right, and I didn't have any issues with the graphics card itself, and, you know, the temperatures were exactly the same. The other thing that I will say though is by removing the front panel on the case, temperatures instantly drop by quite a bit. Within a couple of minutes of removing the front panel, the GPU temperatures had dropped by 5 degrees. And that was at max. And the problem with that is what it does show is the fans aren't really spinning quick enough, but the front panel is quite restrictive at the same time as well, because this technically was a bit warmer than the R6 that it's essentially based on. And the fans are the same as well. They stop at 100, they stop at 1000 RPM. So the difference really is this front panel. So what we can take from that is, if you are going to use this for a dedicated gaming rig that you're going to be putting a hot graphics card in, for example, I'm going to say straight away that you're either going to need to change the front fans, but maybe even get that mesh panel in the roof as well with maybe another fan in. If you're only running a single fan in the roof, then you're not going to run into any issues keeping the glass. Even a couple of fans, you're going to get enough hot air out of the top that it's not going to make too much of a difference. I would say though that if you're going to fit an AIO, I think the glass and everything kind of like teamed in, I think you're probably going to need to flick over to that the mesh panel, you know, the cut panel, the grill panel, just to make sure that you're getting a decent amount of airflow, unless you're quite happy with the fact that you're going for aesthetics and you're going to tune the rest of the kit around it. So overall with this case, I think it looks really nice. The build quality is amazing. It's definitely up there with the best cases on the planet at the moment, build quality wise. The way that the door goes on, clips in, and nothing moves or rattles is so nice. And you'd be surprised how many of them they don't. And to not have the awkward screws to put in, which we all end up eventually knackering the threads on, they do need some serious thumbs up for that. Also, the amount of water cooling that you can get into this case if you wanted to, it's actually quite capable. Negative side on it, as it arrives, airflow is really not that great. The front panel, like the PSU panel at the front, the fact that you still get that massive open section if you do decide to move it over, I don't particularly like that either. And to be honest with you, the size of that is it works for the hard drives, but even if you were to put a radiator in there, you could get a monster radiator in there, like 80mm thick radiator, with push-pull, and it would still be too big. So to me, that is excessive, and it needed a cover, even maybe a cover that was in 2 stages, so you could have some options there if you did want to fit a full rad in. So I like it and I dislike it, probably in equal measure, which is something I'm not particularly used to with a Fractal case. Airflow is definitely an issue. I personally think this needed 1700 or even 2000 RPM capabilities in the front for those of you out there that maybe have wanted to have kept it on air. But I think in reality, this is the sort of thing that it would suit better to have a water-cooled rig inside it, or maybe even full AIOs, but even then you're still going to have to wang those fans out to make up for the limited amount of airflow that you've sadly got in the front. And I find it a bit perplexing that they've managed to do that when the R6 actually worked really well, and this one, it doesn't. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I'm going to let you decide what you think about it. One thing I will say with this case though is that I really do like the external aesthetics. I think they've done a great job with that front panel, and I really like the roof panel, and the customizing aspect of that roof panel is quite unique. So I do really like that. So it's one of the, with this, it's going to be a case of if you like the way it looks, then you're going to have to find it within yourself and your abilities and what kit that you're going to use to build around it. But if you want something really quick and you just want it to work and you want it to have good airflow, then you're probably going to have to find yourself going to find something else.